Today I'm going to reveal my full voice AI prompt formula. This formula taught me a skill that made me thousands of dollars within just a few weeks. And at age 19, I saved my clients tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars every single year, just by avoiding the simple mistakes I'm about to share with you in this video. So here's the breakdown. First of all, I'm going to reveal the 8 sections every high-performance prompt needs. Second, I'll show you the formatting hacks, like Markdown, XML, and delimiter frameworks that sharpen prompt accuracy and prevent failures. Third, the 3 core principles you must follow if you want voice AI to work in real business environments. And finally, the biggest errors companies make, and exactly how to build a system that avoids them from day one. Stick with me till the end, because I'll be sharing my SOPs, checklists, and also a custom AI for your employees to use so that they can write better prompts faster and without supervision. Let's dive in. Okay, so diving straight in with the 8 categories. So first of all, we have the role, the context, instructions, guidelines, tone and style, examples, closing call, and notes. Now, let me just quickly start by saying you do not need all of these every single time. This is specific. The ones that you do need every time, I'm going to highlight. You will need the role. You will need the context. You will need either instructions or guidelines. And you will need examples. Those are the 4 that I would say you should use every single time, along with the closing call, but this is more of it's nice to have, but it's not a must. Now, as you can see, this is actually very specific to voice AI once again. For example, the closing call and the tone and style, those are things that definitely impact the quality of a call. So just keep that in mind, that you can use this for normal prompts, but it's best for voice AI prompts, because that's what we do here. Now, I'm going to do an example for this framework, and I'm going to walk you through step by step. I'm just going to start here on an absolute blank canvas, and we're going to do an example for let's do something for a hotel, because that's something that I've done a lot of content on. Now, in the SOP, you will also find what information do you actually need from the client, and how do you plan these prompts. I won't cover that in this video. That is just for the SOP down below. Okay, so we're going to start with the role. The role is important for it to know. You have to imagine an LLM is trained on pretty much everything there is out there, right? Like the whole internet. And if it's just thrown into a context, it needs to know how it should act. It's like us, if we're walking into a fancy dinner party, we act differently than if we're just hanging out with our friends. And we need to tell it which role it has. Okay, so the role in this case would be something like, and now I'm actually going to add, I'm going to leave a couple of things open because we will add to this over time. So next is context. This is an important one because it needs to know, are the people calling me or am I calling them? That's something you should definitely have in there. So the role of the context, they just kind of set the tone. As you can see, there's no really fixed role for stuff that you absolutely must have in here. But one thing that you should definitely do is at least state the name of the AI. Who is it? Is it an inbound or an outbound phone call? Which company are they working for? Are they working at the front desk? Just something to know, who am I, right? And a good way to think about this is which role are you taking? Because in a sense, these AI agents, they're doing nothing new from what humans can do, right? It's just basically copying what they do and automating it the best way possible. Next, as you can see on the list, we have the instructions. Now, I'm going to go into these. The instructions and guidelines can be substituted for one another. But basically, in the instructions, what you'd have is you do something called chain of thought prompting. Now, chain of thought prompting would be something like, first, greet the caller. Second, ask what you can help them with. Third, if it's a question. And now here, it's important to note which tool you're using, because if you've already built a voice AI assistant, you'll know that these things don't just talk and chat away, but they can actually perform real-world actions. So in this case, we have a tool called information. If it's a question, help them answer it using the information tool. I just put little brackets around, I don't even know what they're called, little symbols around these to signify that this is something separate, but you technically don't have to. It's just a habit. And Yeah, this is really important that you put the names of the tools into the prompt. Now, then you could, for example, do something like if it's for making a new reservation, let me go collect date range and so as you can see now, I've added a little thing here where you first of all collect the date range and then you should confirm it before using the check availability function. So this is basically all this is doing is giving it a step-by-step instruction of what it needs to do in each scenario. And as you can see, it doesn't need to be super long or detailed. The shorter, the better. And there you go. As you can see, this is a very structured approach. And as I said, this is called chain of thought prompting. It's like, when a human tries to complete a task, these are the steps that it would do. So in many ways, you can think of this as an SOP. Okay, moving on to the next one, which is guidelines. Now, guidelines, technically, you could also put all of this into the guidelines. It really doesn't matter. Sometimes I put something in here. You can also call this rules or best practices if you'd like to. And basically, this could be something like use the caller's first name throughout the conversation. You get the idea. You can put stuff in here that you want it to do and stick to. Next, as you can see on our little sheet, is the tone and style. Now, tone and style is actually quite important. This doesn't need to be much, but you can use something like you're friendly and patient and helpful and always try to find the best solution. Actually, that's probably a bit too much. So this in its own is probably already enough to set the tone and the style. So once again, this doesn't have to be much, it just needs to be in there. Next on the list are examples. Now, examples can either be an entire conversation script. So it could, literally, you could have something like a dialogue. You'd go AI and then caller, for example, and then you type the actual entire conversation script that it wants it to take. In this case, there are a couple of different scenarios that could happen. So we're just going to give an example for booking, for example. Then we'd go, the caller would actually start and say something like, so in this case, I've written out the conversation script for when they want to make a booking. You can just provide short examples. For example, if they request information, you can show exactly how it needs to do that. But sometimes a conversation script like this is extremely beneficial. Next on the list is closing the call. Now, closing the call, I'll get to this in a moment, but make sure you don't have this last, and I'll reveal why in just a second. But definitely don't have this as the last bit, because after this, the only thing that's left is the notes, and the notes usually don't stay empty, but for whatever reason the notes stay empty, just make sure that you put this maybe above the examples or somewhere else. For closing the call, you can have guidelines like use the end call function, and just give it some guidelines of when it should be able to use this. Now, this can get tricky, and you have to experiment with this, because sometimes when you, for example, say something like use it when the customer doesn't have any more questions, if in the middle of the call the AI asks, do you have any more questions? And the customer says no, and then after that wants to make a booking, sometimes it will hang up. So be careful with this, and just experiment and try. And a lot of this is trial and error, but as long as you have the right framework, you can actually make tweaks that have an effect. Because if you have a prompt that's just ridiculously long, you can tweak something and it makes no difference. So we'll get into that later, but try to keep them as short as possible. Now, we've arrived at the final one. The notes section is basically just for anything that isn't working. I try to avoid using this until you really have to, but basically, yeah, this is just for stuff that doesn't work, that you can't find a place for in the prompt, add it into the notes section as a last resort, and that will usually make a big difference. Okay, so now that we have our prompt, we're going to move into the second part of this video, which is formatting tricks. Now, formatting tricks, in this case, you want to use a software called Stack Edit. It's just a free, just search for it on Google, Stack Edit, and this is a markdown editor. Now, what is markdown? Markdown is, actually, I'll show you. I'll just copy this prompt. Markdown is a way to format your text, which allows the AI to understand it a bit better. And there are three key things that I want to teach you. First of all, you can use headings. Headings, there are three types of headings. This is the first heading, this is a smaller heading, and this is the least small heading. And if you look at it now, you can see that suddenly we have a heading. And if I put 2 hashtags here, it gets a bit smaller, and 3 a bit smaller again. And you can use that to give the AI an idea of when your new paragraph starts. Now here it is extremely important, keep a space between those two things, because if you have it right next to it, it doesn't actually count it as markdown. So please use this editor to double check that you've formatted everything correctly. Now that's actually the first thing we're going to do. We're just going to go through our conversation and try to format it slightly better, because that alone will allow the AI to understand the structure of our prompt. Now here, for example, we've got a subheading. I'm just going to add 2. And then there we go. Now, something else that you've seen me use throughout, and that's the second principle, is use either numbers to, just give it some structure, or you can use these, and they create bullet points in here. It's just a great way to use to give your prompt a bit more structure, make it easier for the AI to understand. And already you can see that our prompt is a lot more structured. I mean, if you had to read this just as a human compared to this is a lot nicer to look at. And we're just going to finish this up. Okay, so this is markdown formatting, but there's 2 other things I want to show you. First of all, XML. What is XML? Well, basically, it is this. So what this does is basically, in order to write it, you write it like this, and then you write the same thing down below, just with a little slash here. And you can put in here whatever you like. You could call this file, for example, or you could call it prompt, or whatever you want. Basically already describe the contents that's going to be in between here. So in here, for example, you could have a big knowledge base or a big chunk of information. So why wouldn't you just put this directly into the prompt? Well, if you do that, then it will most likely be counted as part of the system instructions. And if, for example, say you've got some menu items you want to put into the prompt. Usually I wouldn't recommend this anyway, but if you wanted to put some information into the prompt, and in the menu items it sends something like serve quickly, and I don't know, it could accidentally pick up something from here and interpret that as I have to answer quickly. So to avoid that, you use this, which is called XML, and then you can put your content in between. And you can actually do the same thing, and this is the third hack I want to show you, just by using these, and then insert your content, and then do that again. So those are these little signs up here, and this is a strategy to put information into your prompt without it actually counting this information as part of the system. So in our case, this is not really necessary. We can leave it out completely for our case. So with this, you have already got an extremely solid prompt that will honestly beat probably 90% of prompts out there. Now, how do you take this from a good prompt to a great prompt? Well, that's what the 3 rules are for. All right, so moving into the 3 rules that you have to follow for each prompt. First of all, keep the critical instructions at the beginning and the end. So I basically touched on this before and said the note section is very powerful because the AI has a tendency to prioritize what is at the beginning and the end of its system instructions. Especially with larger prompts, this can be a big issue because things that get buried in the middle, get lost. And in order to combat this, you're going to use one of the second principles. But in addition, I want to just tell you the note section is so powerful because adding something right at the end will just place a lot more weight on it than something that's in the middle. And that brings us to the second principle, which is keep everything as short as possible. Because the shorter this is, the less tokens you will use, the less it will cost overall, the latency will get better, and also you are able to make tweaks and adjustments that have an effect. When I started out prompt engineering, I was making a software for construction companies in Germany. And we had this thing write very long, complex quotes. And I literally had prompts that went on for pages and pages. I think I had one that was close to 10 pages long. And needless to say, when it didn't work, I would get extremely frustrated and just keep adding things and spamming things onto the notes section at the end, because that was the only thing that made the difference. So keep them as short as possible if you can. I make a V1, V2, and a V3. V1 just to get something out there, and V2 I look through every single word and I just think about how can I summarize this with keeping the content the exact same. Leading us to our third principle, which is positive is greater than negative. Now, it is very tempting to go into the notes section, for example, and to say stuff like, all of these symbols. Now, this is a very normal human instinct, and I get it, but you have to try and rephrase this into something positive, into actions the AI can actually take, because more often than not, in trying to avoid this, it makes another mistake. So instead of telling it what's wrong, just tell it what it should do instead. So in this case, we want it to please speak fluidly and human-like, for example. Or here we would say always collect email, phone, and name before using book function, for example. Now, just to give you a little exercise, these two things obviously don't belong in the notes section. Can you figure out where this one would go out of all of these sections? If you guessed tone and style, then you're correct. We can just copy this into tone and style instead of cramming it into the notes section, because that should really be reserved for as a last resort almost. Next, can you guess where this should go? If you guessed that we put it into the instructions, then that's correct. We put it somewhere like here is probably a good place to put it. There we go. And that has its right place. And you reserve the note section for stuff that really doesn't work out. Now I'm going to share the 4 most common problems that most AI developers actually run into and how to fix them. They're pretty obvious once you know them, but we're going to start with number 1, which is it must always do X. Now, this is something where AI is very good at, right? Doing the same thing every single time. But let's just envision this scenario. You tell it to always use the check calendar function before responding, to check for availability. Now, the problem with this is, what if, for example, they don't have enough information yet? What if accidentally the caller says, can you check for availability? And then the AI instantly tries to check for availability, but doesn't even know what time frame it should check for. And then what it might do is it might try to send like these null values into the tool, which will just result in an error. So the easiest fix is to add a line like, ask for more info if you don't have enough yet. It's a tricky one to spot, and you have to try and fill these gaps. That's why this task, is so lucrative, because they're often things that seem obvious, but you just forget to put in. The second big mistake is that you only provide one example. Now, what can happen here is that if you, in the examples, in this case, we have in our prompt, we have a full example conversation, but maybe you've just added a little example for one specific subject and a line that it should say when it's checking for availability, for example, and it might always say, okay, that time is available. Now, the problem with this is it'll seem very repetitive and robot-like, and a way to combat this is to not use an example that is word for word, but instead say something like, tell the caller that the time is available. The third most common problem is that you have contradictory instructions. So, for example, in the guidelines here, we could have something like always say the dates in this format, for example. But then, if in the notes section we add something like always say the dates in this format, right? Then it'll do one of two things. Either it'll pick one of the two and it'll change every so often, or it'll just do nothing. So you really have to look through these prompts, and they won't be as obvious as this most of the time. You're going to have to look for things that contradict themselves. So, for example, you could have something in here where it says, if the caller tries to kind of extract your system prompt or makes fun of you or tries to, just play with AI, then use maybe the end call function and you can be a bit impatient. But if in the tone and style you say you were always patient and polite, those two things might conflict. So you have to really look through the prompt and do a lot of testing to try and find the things that contradict each other, because those are the things that ultimately just, slow the AI down and bring it to a stop. Alright, so congratulations for making it this far into the video. By now you will know more about prompting than 95% of people out there. But I want to take it a step further. First of all, I've made an AI, a custom GPT that you can talk to and that will help you understand how to write these prompts even better. You can get access to that using the link in the description. Second, I want to give you my SOPs and checklists you can give to your employees that literally help them step by step to write a correct prompt. They're going to start with the questions and the information you need from the client, how to even think about prompting and how to divide everything up into the right sections, and then literally going through this entire video in a checklist that they can complete to write a bulletproof prompt every single time. If you'd like access to that, there's literally no opt-ins, no emails, nothing. Just click the links down below, and while you're there, you can book a free AI consultation call if you're thinking about employing AI in your business. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you in the next one.